How can you remember something you never learned? At first, the question seems impossible. Memory, as we commonly understand it, depends on experience. You can only recall what you have already seen, heard, or understood before. Yet, there are moments that challenge this assumption. A sudden realization that feels strangely familiar. A truth you've never studied but somehow recognize. Philosophers call this anamnesis, the recollection of something the soul already knows. Psychologists call it daisio-connaissance, the sense of already knowing. In neuroscience, memory is explained as a process of encoding and retrieval. Information enters through perception, becomes stored as neural patterns, and is later recalled through associative cues. But what about knowledge that feels innate, insights that seem to arise without prior learning? The 13th century philosopher Ibn Arabi offered a radical explanation. He suggested that true knowledge is not something the mind acquires, but something the soul unveils. What you remember in such moments is not new information, but recognition, the rediscovery of a truth your consciousness already knew before you were born. To understand this idea rationally, we first need to examine how modern science defines memory, and why that definition may be incomplete. In modern psychology, memory is understood as a reconstruction, not a recording. Each time you recall an event, your brain actively rebuilds it using fragments of sensory data, emotional states, and contextual meaning. This makes memory flexible, but also unreliable. Cognitive neuroscience has shown that memories are not stored as fixed images. They are reconstructions guided by attention, emotion, and belief. Studies on false memories demonstrate how easily our recollections can be reshaped by suggestion or bias. In today's information-saturated environment, this flexibility becomes a weakness. Our attention is constantly fragmented, diverted by messages, screens, and external noise. We easily remember trivial data such as brand names, notifications, and passwords, but struggle to retain meaningful insight. This condition, often called semantic saturation, leaves us knowing many facts yet grasping little meaning. Predictive processing theory, advanced by neuroscientist Carl Friston, adds another dimension. It suggests that the brain constantly generates predictions about reality and updates them based on sensory input. We do not perceive the world as it is. We perceive what fits our expectations. This filtering mechanism is efficient for survival, but restrictive for awareness. It means that much of what lies beyond our conditioned models, deeper truths, unfamiliar patterns, remains unnoticed or forgotten. Our memory then becomes mechanical. It records repetition but misses revelation. This is where Ibn Arabi's metaphysical model provides a profound corrective, a theory of memory rooted not in neurons, but in being itself. Ibn Arabi, often called Al-Shaykh, the greatest master, was not only a mystic but also a rigorous metaphysician. His philosophy centers on al-wujud, being, and al-ma'rifa, direct knowing. For him, consciousness is not a product of the brain. It is the foundation of existence itself. According to Ibn Arabi, all knowledge already exists within the divine reality. Human learning, therefore, is not an act of creation but of recollection. The soul does not generate truth. It rediscovers what it has always contained. He grounded this idea in the Quranic verse, "Am I not your Lord?" Before entering the world, every soul testified to this truth. In time and embodiment, that memory becomes veiled. Spiritual life is the gradual unveiling of this forgotten recognition. Thus, remembrance is not mere repetition of divine names. It is recognition, a reactivation of the primordial knowledge inscribed within the human essence. From Ibn Arabi's perspective, memory is not confined to the biological brain. It is an intrinsic property of being itself. He distinguishes between two forms of knowledge: acquired knowledge, mediated through language and concept, and knowledge by presence, an immediate awareness not dependent on symbols. Modern neuroscience presents an interesting parallel. Researchers differentiate between explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory involves conscious recall, facts, events, and data. Implicit memory shapes perception and behavior unconsciously, influencing intuition, skill, and emotion. Ibn Arabi's framework extends this implicit dimension beyond the psychological. He proposes that consciousness retains a pretemporal awareness, the divine names, which pattern the entire field of existence. Every human being is a reflection of these archetypes, and our so-called learning is actually a gradual recognition of them. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung described a similar idea in his theory of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes and inherited knowledge that transcends individual experience. Modern research on intuition also supports this insight. In experiments by Bakora and colleagues, participants began responding correctly to complex patterns several seconds before they could articulate why, suggesting that the body knew before the mind could explain. In Ibn Arabi's terms, this is not memory as retrieval, but resonance. Consciousness does not dig up data. It vibrates in harmony with truths already contained within the structure of being. For Ibn Arabi, forgetting is not a flaw. It is an essential condition of existence. He taught that the soul forgets its divine origin so that it can rediscover it through experience. Without this veil, life would hold no curiosity, growth, or learning. Forgetting makes discovery meaningful. Neuroscience surprisingly agrees. Recent studies demonstrate that forgetting is a feature, not a failure, of cognition. It allows the brain to prune irrelevant information, preventing overload and enabling flexible adaptation. In Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, this veil of forgetfulness serves a cosmic function. It creates the apparent duality between self and world, allowing the one to see itself in the mirror of multiplicity. Human life, therefore, is the gradual process of remembering unity through the experience of separation. A modern analogy can be found in machine learning. Neural networks must periodically forget outdated data to learn new patterns effectively. Likewise, the human soul forgets the infinite so it can rediscover it through finite forms. In this light, forgetting is not the opposite of remembering. It is its precondition. How does one actually remember the real? Ibn Arabi's answer is through remembrance, which he describes as polishing the mirror of the heart. In modern psychological terms, this process resembles attentional training. It involves reorienting consciousness from distraction to awareness. Studies on mindfulness and meditation show that consistent practice leads to greater neural coherence and reduced cognitive noise, allowing deeper states of clarity and focus. In Ibn Arabi's view, remembrance functions in a similar way. The heart, clouded by habitual thought and emotion, distorts the reflection of being. Through focused awareness, remembrance with presence, the distortions clear, and the light of reality is seen as it truly is. Importantly, Ibn Arabi reverses the subject-object relationship of devotion. It is not simply that you remember God, it is that God remembers himself through you. Consciousness is the instrument through which the divine contemplates its own attributes. Thus, spiritual practice becomes a form of cognitive alignment, the resynchronization of personal awareness with the universal field of intelligence. One of Ibn Arabi's most profound statements is, "He who knows himself knows his Lord." This phrase encapsulates his epistemological principle that all knowledge is self-recognition of the real dot. In modern epistemology, knowledge is usually defined as a relation, a subject knowing an object. But for Ibn Arabi, this duality is illusory. Knowing does not travel in a straight line. It moves in a circle from being to manifestation and back to being. Neuroscience offers a parallel in predictive processing theory. The brain is not a passive receiver of data. It is an active modeler, continuously predicting the world and updating itself in response to feedback. Perception itself is circular, expectation meeting experience. Similarly, Ibn Arabi's cosmology suggests that consciousness projects archetypal patterns and experiences them as reality. Through this feedback loop, the divine knows itself in infinite forms. To remember what you never knew is to awaken to this circle, to realize that knowing has no beginning or end. The knower and the known are two reflections in the same mirror of being. The paradox of remembering what you never knew dissolves. When we redefine knowing itself, you do not acquire truth as an external object. You become aware of what you already participate in. Knowledge, in this view, is not information but identification. Ibn Arabi's epistemology transcends both empiricism and rationalism. It proposes ontological participation to know by being. This is not anti-scientific mysticism. It is a higher form of empiricism where consciousness becomes the laboratory. Inner observation is treated as data, the evidence of awareness itself. Even in modern technology, we see a mirror of this logic. Artificial intelligence does not learn facts in a linear way. It recognizes patterns by reactivating existing connections, much like the soul reactivates the latent knowledge it already holds in both systems. Knowledge is not accumulation but activation. Ibn Arabi's insight can be translated into practical, evidence-based disciplines. Cultivate deep attention. Dedicate brief daily intervals to stillness, moments without external input. Sustained attention strengthens neural integration, allowing the mind to pee.